Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody. You're on the Facebook live session with NIB and Nathan Wallis. So welcome everybody. We're just going to start with a short karakia, get us set and set up for the night. This is one of my favourite karakia. I use it often because it's all about children reaching their full potential. It talks about how there's enough love in the world for all children. So it's just, there's no shortage of love. That's just for every child to be able to access that love in order to be able to reach their full potential. So it uses poetic language of child reaching, and being tall like a tree in the forest of Tāne. Koia nei toko tūmanako, kia tupu teitei ahau me he tamaiti a tāne nui. Kia rungu au, kia kiti au, i te aroha o te ao. Kia ora. Okay, here we go. I set off. I get lots of questions coming through social media, and so this is a really good opportunity. I try and answer a lot of those, but can't answer them all. So this is an opportunity for you to get your questions answered. We're going to be taking questions live during the night too, so feel free to type your questions into the question bar. We've got someone collating them at the side. But a lot of you have previously sent in your questions, so we've got a pile of questions to go through, so let's just launch into those. You would have we've sort of themed them together, so if your question's not there specifically, it's because it's really similar to someone else's, and we've put them into themed questions. Okay, let's start with the questions, shall we?
So several parents asked about the benefits of formal education versus home-based learning or schooling. Right. What are your thoughts on the different approaches to education at different ages?
Yeah, so homeschooling versus formal going to school, being pros and cons. Definitely the pros fit with homeschooling. You tend to get much better outcomes with homeschooling because when you look at all the things that make for a high quality educational environment in the classroom, the number one thing is the quality of the relationship with the teacher. The more the teacher knows the student, the better they're able to facilitate learning. The faster learning goes, the more accelerated learning is. Who knows you better than your mother? Or your father, or whoever it is that's teaching you. So you've got that number one aspect straight away. And you've got to remember that a teacher is teaching 30 kids in a classroom. So what takes them 6 hours to do probably takes you about an hour and a half to do when you're teaching 2 kids. I did a study on creative genius as part of my master's when I was a student. And to be a creative genius, you had to invent the field that you're becoming a genius in. Couldn't just be a genius in an established field, had to invent the field. So it's a very narrow set of people that fit the criteria of creative genius. And so I studied 13 of them and looked at all the characteristics that made up in their looking at environment versus genes, what happened in their environment that created these creative geniuses. And one of those hallmarks was being homeschooled, because homeschooled seems to take away the ceiling. The teacher in the class of 8-year-olds is trying to get everyone up to 8-year-old level. Your kid might be at 12-year-old level on something, but the teacher's probably more concerned about the kids that are only at 6-year-old level when they're supposed to be up at 9-year-old level, because again, they've got 30 kids. So definitely the educational benefits are much better for homeschooled children. There's a little note there actually, when you look at the literature, the literature or the research around homeschooling gets a little bit skewed because there is a cohort, a group of people within homeschooling that are there for the wrong reasons, shall we say. Too lazy to get up and get the kids to school. It's a step on the door out from being expelled. So they tend to drag the statistics down. If you take that cohort out, then the research is very wonderful and positive for homeschooled children. The fear that people often have is, what about social skills? They're not going to have social skills because they're not interacting with other kids. And it's just like, really, that's for the homeschooling network, that's stage one. They know that. So every, homeschooler kid I know is involved in a homeschool network, and that homeschool network makes sure there are lots of ample opportunities for children to socialise. They end up having more socialising opportunities than kids going to mainstream schools often. So, yeah, so in short, the literature really supports homeschooling, and I would really support homeschooling if you can do it. My kids asked to be homeschooled. It was like, no way, I'll kill you. So, you've got to have the temperament to be able to do the homeschooling. But certainly, it's associated with very positive things in the literature.
Cool. And what are your top tips for raising a healthy teenager?
Boarding school. No, that's just a joke. My three top tips for raising a healthy teenager. Number one would be don't look at your teenager in the middle of adolescence and think that's an indication of the adult that you're going to raise. Because actually being an adult is all about having a frontal cortex, brain number 4, the brain that controls your emotions, understands consequences, set goals, all the things that make you successful. And in the middle of adolescence, what adolescence is about is the fact that that frontal cortex is shut for renovations. So it's really unfair to look at a kid in the middle of adolescence when 90% of the time the brain that he's going to be in as an adult is shut down. You should look at your child when they're 11, and that's much more of an indication of who they're going to be as a teenager, because generally they still had some frontal cortex going on there. So 10% of the time they're going to have some frontal cortex. My advice would be give your attention to that 10% of the time and try and ignore the other 90% of the time when they're just being all emotional and they're shrugging their shoulders and they're rolling their eyes and they're sighing deeply. You don't need to give attention to that. That's their emotional brain. It's already got a turbocharger on it, so you don't need to help it. Right? The part that you need to help is that frontal cortex, controlling emotions. So if that's only there 10% of the time, try and give as much attention to that when it does turn up as you possibly can, and as little attention to the 90% emotions that you can. That'd be tip one. Tip two would be, it's all about communication, having a quality relationship with your teenager. So learn to reflect back or validate emotion before you offer strategies. Parents often, with the best of intentions, trying to help their teenager, go straight to problem-solving strategies for what they should do instead. You have to remember that 90% of a child's worldview or a teenager's worldview is emotion. So if you don't speak to that emotion first, 90% of their worldview, you just ignored them. You're not listening to them. So chances are they won't listen to you. So, children do as you do, not as you say. So if you want the kids to listen to you, then you've got to model that by reflecting back emotion first. So when they go, I got in trouble because this kid called me a name, so I punched him and got a detention, instead of you going straight to strategies and going, well, why didn't you go to the dean? Why didn't you go and talk to your teacher? Then they think you're nagging. Go to the emotion first. Wow, you must have been so angry. Then go to your strategies. How come you didn't go to the dean? By acknowledging that emotion first, the kid feels listened to. And if they feel listened to, they're way more likely to listen to you. So they're not that quick at tips, really, are they? Too. So, judge your teenager by who they are 10%, and the best of their behaviour is who they're likely to be as an adult. Validate emotion before you try and give the child any strategies. And my third tip for having a healthy teenager is don't try and stand over them, try and negotiate as much as possible. We talk about 3 different parenting styles. The literature uses these boring terms: authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and they're hard to understand. I like Barbara Colorosso's terms, which is brick wall, jellyfish, backbone. They're the 3 types of parent. You can probably work out what type they are just from the description. A brick wall parent, shut up and do as you're told. Dad was traditionally a brick wall. No, shut up, let's do it. Jellyfish has got no spine, just wants to be friends with their kids, really wants their kids to be happy, and finds it hard to follow through on a boundary. And then the backbone style of parenting. A backbone gives you structure and support, but it is flexible. And that refers to the style that you're ready to get a healthy teenager. You want to have that backbone style of parenting. If you're saying, shut up and do as you're told, you will be home at 10:30. No negotiation, 10:30. The kid doesn't have to use his frontal cortex. He doesn't have to make any decisions. So he's probably not going to be a good decision maker. If you want your teenager to be a good decision maker and make healthy decisions, they need practice, so they need involved in those decisions. So it takes longer, but it's just the difference between saying you'll be home at 10:30 to saying, well, okay, this is the first time you've been out at a party that's, I know adults are supervising it, but what do you think is an appropriate time for me to pick you up? And when they're doing that negotiation, they might say 2 a.m., which was ridiculous, and then you've got to go, 9 p.m. But you negotiate, but that negotiation is using their frontal cortex. If that's your general style of parenting all the way through teenage years, when you're negotiating stuff, you've still got set boundaries. You're not going to let them stay out till 2 a.m., but it doesn't really matter whether it's 9:30 or 10:30 or 11. That negotiation is going to prepare your teenager well for adulthood. And all the research says that those are the teenagers that get the best outcomes, that turn out the best, are the ones raised under that backbone style of parenting. We all use all 3 styles in any one given day, but it's which style you are mainly. Like I said before, traditionally dads are a brick wall and mum's a jellyfish, and together you got this, backbone. But now, we don't have those clearly defined roles anymore. So, we normally find we've got one style we particularly fall into, and we're trying to move towards the backbone style with our parenting. But those have been my top 3 tips.
Many parents had questions around sleeping. What are your tips for dealing with kids who wake up numerous times through the night and won't go back to sleep?
Oh, this is such a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's looking at the child's needs, But we don't just have the child's needs there by themselves. We don't put human development at the centre. There's need things like as mum and dad both going back to work. Because I would say the child sleeping through the night, why do we hurry to get a child sleeping through the night? You're not supposed to sleep through the night for 8 hours. Adults don't sleep 8 hours. You've learned to link your sleep cycles together. So there's 3 or 4 times a night where you come close to waking up. Usually if you're a guy, you don't actually wake up. You just pull get the blankets off your partner, roll over and go back to sleep. You don't actually become conscious. Women, through pregnancy and getting up to kids, have normally actually learnt to fully wake up during their sleep cycles. So they do, between their sleep cycles, so they do wake up 2 or 3 times a night. During pregnancy, to go to the toilet, and when the baby's born. Actually, I know lots of mums that when their kids are 12, 13, 14 and waking up for the longest time still wake up 2 or 3 times a night in between their sleep cycles. So yeah, it's a bit of a myth that you're sleeping for 8 hours. It's kind of obvious if the baby's going to link their sleep cycles together, because you're not teaching them to sleep 8 hours, you're teaching them to link their sleep cycles together. So a baby who's in a bassinet right beside your bed, so that as soon as they start to stir, you can reach out and stroke them, or give them a bottle, or breastfeed them back to sleep, and they don't fully wake up. That's a child that's learning to link their sleep cycles together. A kid put in a nursery down the other end of the house and just, he's got to learn, and left to scream, is really just learning to wake up fully in between sleep cycles. And all they're going to learn is not to call out, because it's a waste of time, no one's coming. But they're still going to wake up. They're not necessarily linking their sleep cycles together. So from just 100% from the baby's point of view, maybe you've got an unrealistic expectation about the baby sleeping through the night. I think if they're under 18 months old, they're not really supposed to sleep through the night. I know you get parents, I had one child that was born sleeping through the night. That just, makes it horrible for all the other parents who've got that baby that wakes up every hour. But you get, what you get. So if you can, I would say go back to sleep during the day when the child goes back down for their afternoon sleep, and make up for your sleep that way. If the child's waking up during the night, I would be really hesitant about putting a child under 12 months old on a sleep program. I don't think it's going to wreck them. I don't think it's going to destroy them if you do. But it's not going to be good for them in any way, so it's not something I would advocate. I would say just keep getting up to the child. You don't want them to fully so much wake up in the middle of the night, especially if you can't just go to bed in the afternoon tomorrow because you're not an at-home parent. So keep the lights low, keep your interaction low, be there for the child, but not all fun and stimulating and teaching them to wake up in the middle of the night. If you're talking about a child that is older, so I would put off the sleep program for as long as possible. But I do want you to understand that if everything else in your child's life is wonderful, we look at risk factors, bad things that can happen to the kid that lead to negative outcomes, and resiliency factors, things that lead to positive outcomes. If your child already has, did I say that one was good? If your child already has good resiliency features, like, they've got 2 parents, they've got involved grandparents, you speak a bit of a second language, the parents have got a university degree, all of those things, you're so far down the resiliency end that doing on the sleep program and taking one step that way is not going to wreck your kid. So if you need to put them on the sleep program, it's not going to wreck them. It's just not something I'd advocate. Once the child's over 18 months old, I think they've really developed their secure base, and I don't think the sleep program's going to do any real harm. So then I would just follow that more nurturing type sleep program where you leave them for 5 minutes, and then you leave them for 10 minutes, and then you leave them for 20 minutes. There's lots of supports out there too, specifically for how to do those sleep programs in an attachment-focused kind of way. So look online for those resources. I'm not giving you the general, but they will give you that step-by-step process about how to do it in such a way that your child still feels secure and still feels that you are available to them, and you don't threaten any of that security, but you start to get a full night's sleep. That's a bit of a long answer, but I think really, if the child's under 1, you probably just need to suck it up, and get up to and respond to the baby. Get your people to come in during the day and really help them, so that you can go down for a sleep and stuff, but do what you need to do. But yeah, I'd rather see, though, I know it sounds a bit heartless, but I'd rather see the stress go onto the parent than onto the newborn baby. So I know it's difficult when you're not getting a full night's sleep, but I think there's a lot of other things we can do to support you other than dumping that stress onto the most vulnerable person in that equation, which is the baby, and just leaving them to cry. Yeah.
So we have an anonymous question. My older teenager refuses to help around the house or pay board, even though he earns enough to do so. I've encouraged him to move out if he doesn't want to follow the rules. What tips do you have for dealing with this situation or dealing with difficult or withdrawn teenagers in general?
Okay, that's a hard one, isn't it? Because I think, in all honesty, that mum's just got to wait a couple of years. It's just halfway through simmering in adolescence. Most of the situations I come across like that, they just there's a little low-level bickering until the child develops a bit more frontal cortex, and and either goes flatting and sees how difficult it is, or just grows up and matures a little bit and starts to contribute more. So I know that's probably not the strategy you want. You want some wonderful strategy that's going to make your teenager turn around and go, oh, look, I've been really unreasonable. And, least I can do is put my clothes away when you're doing my laundry. And there is no strategy that gets them to do that. It's called, adulthood. And you just have to wait for it. I would say in that situation, you might not be able to, I wouldn't kick your child out of the home, and you can't make him pay board, but you don't have to provide a luxury service either. And you don't have to accommodate your life so much to this child who's now old enough to actually go flatting if you want to. So if I was in that situation, I wouldn't be kicking the child out, but if I wanted to clean his room, I would clean his room. I wouldn't be expecting his privacy. I wouldn't be so much respecting his privacy, because I'd say, if you want privacy, go flatting. You're living in my house and I want the house to be tidy. I tolerated that pigsty the whole time you were a teenager, but now you're actually an adult old enough to clean it or go flatting. Now I'm going to have a tidy room. I wouldn't invade their privacy, so I'd give them warning. I'm going to be, this week I won't be doing it on Monday and Tuesday, but from Wednesday onwards, any one of those days, I could just go in and start cleaning your room. They've got time to move their personal stuff. But I'm trying to say, you might not be able to kick them out, but you don't have to accommodate to them either. Make sure that you start moving the house towards how you want it to run, and not how the teenager wants it to run. Don't be buying his favourite food with the grocery shopping and stocking up the cupboard with his Coca-Cola and stuff, because he ain't ever going to shift out if you do that. I wouldn't do anything mean and punitive, because I think that just lowers the quality of your relationship. And you've got this far. You've obviously got a good enough relationship that you don't want to leave home, so you don't want to just descend into conflict for these last few years. So I think, just start doing things to suit yourself more than him.
Chantal asks, what's your advice for parents who have completely different parenting styles and philosophies? How can we get to agree to and practice the same parenting philosophy?
There's sort of two things there, because we do want to be on the same page and give the kids consistent messages, but it's worth noting that you don't really have to have the same parenting style. You don't have to be consistent and on the same page. You have to not undermine the other parent, but you don't have to have the same relationship framework, the same consistency. Actually, even when we try to, none of us achieve that. No one has exactly the same framework for dealing with mum as they do for dad. Even though mum and dad are trying to be incredibly the same and have similar rules, dad's easier to get cash from than mum is. Mum's less likely to get grumpy if you bring her to come and pick you up. Like, they can't be consistent. So you work out with even though they try. So you bring up a whole different relationship framework for dealing with mum than you do for dealing with dad. You bring up a whole different relationship for dealing with your grandparents. There's whole lots of stuff you can get away with that your grandparents let you away with that your parents won't let you away with. So what I'm saying is, children don't have one relationship model that you will have to be consistent to get to that one model. Children bring up a different model for each different person they're dealing with. So they can actually, more than you think, deal with dad's draconian medieval parenting style of brick wall stuff. I'm not advocating that, but that's normally what's behind a conversation like that. Dad's like, shut up, there's your tongue. Mum's got more facilitative attachment style, grow the frontal cortex. How do we deal with that? What I'm saying is, it doesn't matter as much as you think that they don't match up. As long as you're consistent in your parenting style and dad and your partner's style is not undermining and undoing your style, they can be consistent in their style and you can be consistent in your style, and the child comes up with a different framework to deal with each. In some ways, that doubles their relationship capacity. They know how to deal with a brick wall parent and they know how to deal with a backbone parent. Other than that, that's just reassuring me that they don't have to be on the same page, but I do understand, you don't want to be undermined and you want the other parent to understand. It's a really difficult question to answer, because, the only way I've found to get you on the same page is shared education. That's why I do those parent evenings and stuff. If it's put across in a way where dad gets that whakamarama moment, that aha moment, then that helps to bring them onto the same page. Because I think probably you are on the same page in terms of, start with what you've got in common. you're both parenting in a way that you believe is going to be the absolute best outcomes for your child. Dad isn't parenting differently to you to get worse outcomes. He thinks he's going to grow a better man or a better woman by being the way he is. So start from that place that you've both got the same intentions, and then educate yourselves about how is that. It just sound like I'm planning to come to my own talks, but I do think coming along to a talk like the one I do that focuses on human development and gives you the research and the information, puts you on the same page and gives you a shared vocabulary, and you won't agree with everything, but at least it starts that you can see what you do agree on, and at least you're starting from a base of research-based information. So there, try and drag them along to a talk, see if that helps.
A few parents asked, how do you stop your children from fighting with each other?
Oh yeah, well, I was looking at these questions beforehand. That's got to be one of the hardest questions because I don't know. That's the honest answer that any parenting expert should give you, really. We've got some strategies for what you can do and ways you can approach it, but there is no magic solution. One of the, it's sibling rivalry. This is another way of talking about the kids fighting. It's worth knowing, and what made me feel better was that the most sibling rivalry you will get is when there is a 2-year age gap. You see that in the literature, that when there's an 18-month or shorter age gap, they tend to operate more like twins. So they still argue, but just nowhere near as much. And when there's more than a 2.5-year age gap, then there's enough of a developmental difference between the two that one's clearly the older sibling and one's clearly the younger. It tends to be the 2-year age gap that's not enough of a gap to have completely separate developmental domains, not close enough to operate like twins. 2 years is just the perfect gap to have constant competition between the children. So they'll be competing over who sits in the front seat and who hugs dad first when he comes through the door, and if anything can be turned into a competition, it will be turned into a competition when there is a 2-year age gap. The only way you can have more conflict than having a 2-year age gap is if you have a 2-year age gap with opposite gender. So a boy and a girl, 2-year age gap. So that's exactly what I had. They were even due on the same day. So they really were 2 years apart. They just fought constantly. So I can't say with all of my research and stuff that, I'll share next the general strategies, but I'm just being honest and saying I didn't find any strategy that miracle worked. I found myself often reduced to strategies of keeping them apart. Okay, right, you're in the front seat, you're in the back seat. Okay, there's a clock on the wall and you've got a remote, there's 1 hour, so work it out, because that's part of the strategies, part of the literature that you read. Like I say, no miracle solution, but it is helpful to, rather than come in and be the judge and pretend like you know what happened, because you don't really know what happened, is to feed them strategies for how to solve the problem themselves. So like that example I just gave, rather than me coming in, for goodness sake, and just turning the TV off and confiscating the remote, because when I get angry, that's what I do. Right, you're going to the TV, just take the TV off, both of you, neither you have the TV. But that doesn't really teach them any strategies for how to resolve that the next time. So a better strategy is to, like I say, come in and go, for goodness sake, there's a clock on the wall, you've got 1 hour, that'll be 30 minutes television each, work it out and negotiate what program you want to watch, and come up with an agreed solution. You've got 10 minutes to come up with a solution that you both agree to, or we'll just turn the TV off and we can try again tomorrow. So if you can't separate them, then try and give them strategies for how they can solve that problem themselves. But in all honesty, I find that the way to stop kids fighting is just wait. You let it simmer for about 20 years and then they like each other. And that's what I've found works. Not much successful before that. So just persevere. They do end up loving each other quite a lot, no matter what they say.
Lisa asks, what advice do you have for helping a child deal with traumatic experiences in a healthy way? An accident, for example.
Right, yep. So how to help a child deal with something that's traumatic, but in a healthy way. I think it's about two things. It's about acknowledging the emotion that's behind it, because when you've been traumatized, there's a massive amount of emotion, and that's your first sort of primary response. And if that's not acknowledged, like we talked about before, basically acknowledging it helps to calm it, which allows that frontal cortex to come in. If we don't acknowledge it and we go straight to trying to teach them strategies how to calm it, they feel not listened to. It's like when someone says to you when you're really upset, calm down. No one ever calms down when you've been told to calm down by someone, because they're ignoring, what the issue is for you. So, what you have to do instead is say something like, look, I can see this has made you really angry, and fair enough, and then give you strategy. When you've acknowledged their emotion, they feel listened to, they instantly calm down. You can actually even see this on a brain scan. Your emotional brain is your amygdala. The more electrical activity is happening in your amygdala, the more emotion you've got, and the less common sense and cortex you've got. So when all this electrical activity happening in your amygdala is you're really angry, when we say, oh, I can see this has made you really angry, and acknowledge that emotion, there's immediately a drop in the electrical activity in the amygdala. So even on a biological, physiological level, you can see how powerful it is to name someone's emotions. So for a healthy response to dealing with trauma, step one, acknowledge and validate the emotion. Oh, that must have been really awful. That must have been really sad. That must have made you feel really scared. Just, you don't have to get the emotions right. Just have to throw the emotions out there and check them out. But then the emotions are acknowledged. And then the second part is to have a healthy response. You want to finish with what the literature calls cognitive training, or we would just finish with a strategy that is positive. So had an accident, oh, that must have been really scary, and seeing all that blood on the road must have been horrific. And so you acknowledge the emotion that you must have been really scared, and then give a strategy, but something that is positive, but at least you're sitting here talking to mum and dad about it, and I know that that's 90% of it. If you get it outside of your head, that's you're 90% of the way there to having a healthy response to it. So good on you for talking to us about it. Basically validate the emotion and then offer a strategy. The kid's going, oh, I'm getting really freaked out by all this COVID-19 stuff, and is the world going to end from viruses and stuff? Then you acknowledge it and go, oh, I know it can seem really scary and we don't know what's going to happen, it's unpredictable, but then end with a positive affirming statement. But we're one of the best countries in the world at dealing with the response. We're already on our way to being vaccinated. I think we've got this. So you end on a positive note. That's a healthy response.
Charlize said, hi Nathan, we have a 2.5-year-old that's very sensitive to being told off and sometimes ends in meltdowns that we really struggle to navigate positively. What tools or tips do you have for guiding him through the frustration he experiences mid-meltdown while managing my own frustration too?
Right. Oh, there's lots in that one. Is it Charisse?
Charlize.
Yeah, kia ora. My short answer would be... I don't want this to sound too blunt, right? But my short answer would be stop telling the 2.5-year-old off. There's no real need to tell off a 2.5-year-old. Now I know you're not screaming and yelling, but that general tone of warning and a slight telling off, those are the children that tend to have the more extreme behaviour. Whereas if you've got, instead of a warning type tone or a telling off type tone, you come more from a place of helping and assisting. He says, what's an example? You need to put your shoes, in the shoe cupboard. You need to put your gumboots in the shoe cupboard. Rather than telling off, I've told you to put your shoes in the shoe cupboard, please. Then you come from more of a helping place. Oh, buddy, Daddy really needed you to put your shoes in the shoe cupboard. Would you like Dad to help you do that? And interrupt his play and do it with him, but still getting him to help do it. So you're coming from a helping place rather than a telling off place. You may just have a super sensitive child that is really sensitive to any type of negativity. Children that really want to please you. You just have these highly sensitive personality types. And everyone who's 2.5 is highly sensitive. So, I know it's only half your question, so half of it is maybe let's stop telling them off and let's just come from a place of trying to help and guide the 2-year-old. We don't need to tell them off, we just need to help them, right? And we can say positive and not have any telling off tone. But your question is really getting to the heart of when he's been given a boundary and he can't have it, even if you've done it really nicely, and he's having a meltdown, how do we help him with that meltdown? And it's sort of a similar answer to what I said before. It's about naming his emotion. The 2-year-old's overwhelmed by the emotion, and when you just say, I can see that's made you really angry, buddy, that mum won't give you a biscuit before dinner. Knowing that you've seen his emotion doesn't make it go away, but it certainly makes it lessen a whole lot. Same with your own emotion. So my strategy then for how you're going to help him when he's halfway through meltdown, first of all, model calmness yourself by, for yourself, do the 6-4-6 method, which just is breathing in on the count of 6, breathe out on the count of 4, and breathe in on the count of 6. That regulated breathing just helps to calm your amygdala and your emotional brain and bring your frontal cortex back online. The short version of that is your ancestors 100,000 years ago, when they were being chased by saber-toothed tigers across the Sahara, what are the chances they stopped and went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4? No, they wouldn't, because they'd be eaten, right? So by the fact that you've got controlled breathing, you're being in a real survival situation, being chased by a tiger, you'll be breathing shallow, and it'll be irregular. It won't be the same count, 6, 4, 6. So by doing that, you basically send a direct message to your brain: you're not really being chased by a tiger. You can calm the stress response system, and it helps you just to calm down. So it's really super quick, 6, 4, 6. So then you're calm. You can model that calmness to your child, and then from that calm place, I would just start naming his emotions. I can see that's made you really angry, buddy. I can see that you're feeling really upset. You don't have to fix the upset if you're following the boundary. If he's upset because he didn't get a biscuit, you can still go, would you like a cuddle from mum? Because it's not bad to give him a cuddle to help him through his grief at not getting a biscuit. The bad thing is to give him a biscuit. But it's not bad to offer the support, and guidance to get through that. Yeah. So yeah, that's the approach I would take.
Brianna asks, how do you strengthen resilience and perseverance in your kids under 7 in a conscious and intentional way?
Okay, that last part, in a conscious and intentional way. Because the first part's easy to answer. How do you strengthen resilience and perseverance in a child under 7? Give them a totally child-centred free play curriculum. Parents always say to me, how do I get my child to concentrate? Because they want the kid to sit down as a 4-year-old and be like he's 10 and study the alphabet and learn the alphabet. But your 4-year-old's not 10. The way he learns to focus his attention is not by doing work that you chose and making himself do it. That's not how you develop perseverance. You develop perseverance by letting him choose the thing that he wants to do. So if he wants to make a dam in the river, he will focus for 2 hours on building that dam in the river. But parents don't tend to see that as focusing his attention for 2 hours. It's when they say, sit down and colour in that picture while I'm going to this meeting, and they want the kid just to finish that task. It's understanding that those are all focusing your attention, being very conscious of it and knowing that's what you're doing. All of those are very frontal cortex behaviours, which are going to come much, much later. I mean, we're talking teenagers are not as super conscious of, how long they're focusing their attention and stuff. So it might just be having a realistic expectation. Under 7, they're probably not going to be super conscious of it. It's what the literature calls dispositions. Dispositions is the academic term that talks about the behaviours that underpin your ability to be brainy and successful. So we see focusing their attention and learning reading and writing, but to focus that attention, you needed the disposition of being able to sustain your attention. So the kid who has been allowed to choose his own thing and build a dam in the river can sustain his attention for 2 hours. The kid who's in an adult-led curriculum will interrupt his play and bring him over to the mat and say, what colour is this? What number is this? Mat time, he can focus his attention for 7 to 10 minutes. So if you want someone who can persevere, then let them be in charge of their curriculum under 7. Don't worry so much about literacy and numeracy, worry about dispositions. Are they able to focus their attention on one project for 2 hours? They will on building a dam, they won't on the task that you choose. Are they able to, do they have the disposition of persevering through failure? If they got to build a dam in the river and that's what they chose to do, they wouldn't have dammed it successfully the first time, they would have failed 20 times and only got it on time 21. So now you've got a kid who can persevere through 20 failures. That's a disposition that's going to set you up to do well in education. Whereas again, the kid where it's an interrupted curriculum and we bring him over and try and teach him consciously and say, right, then that kid, what colour is this? He tends to get it wrong once and he doesn't want to have any more goes. So now he's got a disposition of either get it right the first time or just give up, which is a disposition that's not going to see you as well as the kid who was building the dam, who's got a disposition saying, persevere through 20 failures and you'll eventually get there. So yeah, to teach your kid to focus their attention, let them choose the activity. I have parents saying to me, my child can't focus their attention and they can't sustain their attention. And then the child starts playing peekaboo, 9-month-old, and poking the tongue, and you poke the tongue back, and then they poke their tongue at you, and you poke the tongue back, and then they poke their tongue back at you. I bet you your baby perseveres longer than you do in the tongue poking exercise. It's you that gets sick of poking your tongue back and moves on to the next thing. So even from when they're little, by you doing even though it's boring, continuing, not just doing it 5 times, but continuing to poke your tongue back and staying in that moment for as long as your baby wants to imitate. Now they get to do it 90 times instead of the 5 or 10 times before you moved on to something else. Now the baby's learning to focus their attention. So it's really got to be about under 7, about you following the child's lead rather than trying to consciously teach the child how to focus their attention.
A few parents are interested in your thoughts on listening, or more specifically, non-listening in under fives. Do you have any tips for engaging their attention when they're off in their own world?
Right, yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? For not listening, it's that selective hearing thing, like when they're, yeah. I mean, the facetious part of me thinks just be more interesting, be more innovative. They will listen to you if you start doing your pirate's voice or start singing a song or something. I think what's maybe behind that is when we're saying to the kids, right, come on, go and get your shoes, and no one's listening and they carry on playing and stuff. I'm just guessing that that's maybe when they're not listening. So yeah, what's a strategy for that? Again, if we knew the answer to that, would have made billions. I think a strategy for when the kids aren't listening is they probably need more help from you. That they maybe got an unrealistic expectation that the 3-year-old's going to jump up and go, okay, Dad, I'll go and get my shoes. That really, when they're young children, we have to do, I think of it as like scaffolding is what they call it. I think of it as like an apprenticeship. They're learning to be a grown-up, but for a start, you have to do 99% of it. I mean, when they're a baby, you're even feeding them, changing their nappy, but then when they get a little bit older, now they can suck their own thumb, and so now you're only doing 98% of it, and they're doing 2%. Then they start going to the toilet by themselves, and now you're doing 95%, but they're 5% looking after themselves. I think that general approach, that it's like if you want them to get up and listen and get their shoes ready, then the first time you do it, you might have to do 95% of it with them. So it's getting up with them and going, come on, buddy, Dad says we're going to get your shoes. Do you remember where your shoes are? Right, we need to pack that thing away. I think your shoes are in your bed. Come on, I'll go with you. And you are doing 95% of it, but the next time he can do 90%. And the next time he can do, the next time you only have to do 90%. And the next time you only have to do 80%. And then we're seeing the kid takes more and more of that responsibility. So I think to get the kids to listen, it's got to be a habit. And the way that you form that habit is that when you say it, you make sure it's followed through because you get up and do 95% of it with them. And then the next time you only do 90%, the next time you only do 85%. But there's no magical recipe for just how to get the 5-year-old to stop what they're doing and say, oh, okay, Dad, I'll jump up and get that ready now.
Chantal says, hi Nathan, we have 2 daughters aged 8 and 5. Our 8-year-old often comments that we treat her younger sister better than her and love the younger one more than her. This causes a lot of rivalry between them, and nothing we've tried has made a long-term difference. Please help.
Okay, that's interesting. I think I'm thinking similar stuff to what we thought before, that some kids are highly sensitive, we could, as the adults, jump into our cortex and focus on the logical stuff. That's ridiculous. Of course, you don't love children in amounts. So, the concept of loving one more than the other is not true. You could get into the legal, logistical aspects of it, and you could lose sight of the fact that 90% of your daughter's worldview is emotional. So to her, in her worldview, it doesn't matter so much whether you do love the younger child more. What matters in this equation is that she feels like you love the child more. Adults get stuck on but it's not actually true, because they're in the frontal cortex about what is and how things actually are. Whereas remembering children are focused on their limbic system and are way less concerned about how things actually are and way more concerned about how things feel. So rather than spending the whole time negating it and saying, don't be silly, that's not true, you're not going to say it's true, but I would look at what is the emotional need behind that. So with a child like that she's expressing that she's feeling in some way that her emotional tank is not being filled, and that's, that you love someone else more. So we don't want the child to grow up with that feeling. So I wouldn't negate for her that it's not true. I would first of all say, I'm really sorry that you feel that way, honey. Then negate that it's not true. It's certainly not what I want, you to feel, and it's not how I feel as a parent. I would say to my child, it's difficult for me to explain it because when you're an adult, you don't really love people in amounts. I don't love you more than I love your dad or but it doesn't, it's all right that you don't understand that, but it concerns me that you feel that way, honey. I don't want you to feel that way. I want you to feel fully loved. There's a thing that we talk about, if you go onto YouTube and go Nathan Wallis mate date. I talk about this thing of advocating for parents to have a mate date with your child for 10 minutes a week. I'm not going to try and reproduce here what it is because it takes 10 minutes, but it's basically just a 10-minute window where the parenting rules are completely changed and your child gets the opportunity to express exactly how they feel without any negative consequence. I would set up mate dates for this child, and I would just let them talk about how they feel. Rather than say, don't be silly, of course I love you as much as your sibling, then just validate about their feelings. So it feels like I love the younger one more than you. What is it that makes you feel that way? So she gets a chance. Maybe it's just a matter of that child talking about it, saying, oh, well, when we get home from school, you say, I'm really excited to see Sally, and, I hardly get any response at all. Then instead of saying, that's ridiculous, then you say, oh, so it feels like when you come home from school that I'm all excited to see your sister, but I'm just sort of, to see you. It's called paraphrasing. Just reflect back so she knows she's actually been heard. And she goes, yeah, that's right. And then, then you can say, well, honey, that's not what I want you to feel, and I'm sorry if you feel that way. I think parents are scared to say sorry because they think they're admitting guilt and that they have done it. Don't focus on whether it's right or wrong. Stay focused on the fact that's how she feels and that's what you're addressing. You know it's not true, but it's how she feels, so you need to address it. Because it could be as simple as having that conversation, saying, well, honey, from now on, when you walk through that door, I'm going to be making such a song and dance about you walking through. And, the next day when she comes home from school, you make a big song and dance about, being right over the top about it. And you might be humorous on that first day, but it could just simply be a matter of that's a child who's sensitive, who's got a wee bit more needs than other children and needs a little bit more attention than the average kid. And maybe all you have to do is stop what you're doing and for 30 seconds make a big deal about the fact that she just walked through the door, and actually her emotional cup will be full and the thing will be gone. So, I would just focus on trying to meet the need rather than telling her she shouldn't have it and that she's wrong. Because if that's how she feels, that's how she feels. So we want to address that and have her not feeling that way. It could be as simple as 30 seconds ritual when she comes through the door that you actually stop what you're doing and make a big deal, and that's all she needs.
Now we'll go to some of the live questions.
Okay.
So Christina asks, do you have any tips on raising or disciplining a 5-year-old when incentives and punishments don't work?
Okay, tips on raising a 5-year-old when incentives and punishments don't work. I'm not surprised punishments don't work. They never ever work. We've got what you've got that your parents didn't have is Google in your lounge. You can look and see that research over and over again shows the kids that the more you punish the kid, the worse their behaviour is, the naughtier the child is. Rewards are far more effective in the literature, but my top tip would be go to the research again. What the research tells us, the way you get the best behaved kid is a method called cognitive training, which is a flash academic way of saying tell the kid what to do instead of what not to do. So instead of saying when the kid smacks the kid over the head to take the toy in the sandpit, instead of saying no snatching, that's naughty, you're not allowed to snatch, time out, that's telling them what not to do. Cognitive training, telling them what to do instead. Mate, if you want the toy, you need to go up to your friend and say, can I please have a turn after you? And then wait for your friend to give you a turn. It really is that deceptively simple. Tell the child what to do. Basically, our children's behaviour is a lot affected by the language coming out of our mouths as the parent. So if we spend all day saying, no running, no fighting, stop being mean, then the children are constantly picturing running, fighting, and being mean, because that's the language that you use all the time. 25% of your brain is taken up with visualising the language spoken to you. So every time you're saying, stop fighting, stop being mean, 25% of the brain is filled up with pictures of fighting and being mean. So they tend to then fight and be mean. Cognitive training is the other way around. Fill their head up with the stuff that they should have done instead. Mate, if you want the toy, you have to go up to your friend and say, can I please have a turn after you? And then wait for your friend to give you a turn. Now you're helping the child with and telling him what he should have done instead. It avoids all of that telling off stuff. It means rather than punishing him, you're actually helping him. And again, just like I said with the other answer, it may just be that the first time you've got to do 99% of it. It's only the second time you've got to do 98%. And it's generally why we have to do things 100 times with our kids, because we are doing sort of 100% of it the first time and 99 the second time and 98 the third time. And there's no real way to avoid that. It is an apprenticeship that children have to go through. They kind of have to watch you doing it 100 times to be efficient at it themselves.
Next question, how can you develop meaningful relationships with foster children when there's an obvious distance?
Yeah, okay. With foster children when there's an obvious distance. so dependent. I've had lots of foster children. I find it's very different if the authorities bring them to your house and dump them, then that kid has lots of hostility about being there, than if it's done in a more organic, whānau type way, and they're often grateful to be there. I would do the mate date thing. Yeah. Again, go onto YouTube. It's only like a 7-minute clip, but you're going to have rules and boundaries, and that's probably going to be a traumatized kid, but you want to have, foster some type of close relationship as well. So they've got all these new rules and stuff to have to follow being in a new house. Giving them, and that you can explain to them what a mate date is, watch the clip together, but they'll know they've got that 10 minutes a week where they get to express exactly how they feel. And I think if they're allowed to express exactly how they feel without any consequences, and you just have to listen, you're not allowed to correct, and you're not allowed to lead, and you're not allowed to, then you will, I think, if you're doing a 10-minute one of those a week, then after 2 months of doing that, you've achieved the same sort of level of closeness that you would typically have to have lived with a child for a couple of years to have achieved. I think it's the cheat sheet way to building a close relationship is to give them that 10 minutes every week. If the child's particularly traumatised and you've got the time, do it 3 times a week. It's just as long as it's ritualised and it's clear. And I always have to say too, if you're a foster parent, then read Bruce Perry's book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, because it gives you a very clear outline neurologically about how you can heal that child's brain and how help them to reach their full potential. He's actually just written a new book with Oprah Winfrey, which I'm only halfway through reading, and then I lost my copies. I'm going to have to order another one. Called What Happened to You? And it's kind of a fundamental book because they posed the theory that for the last 100 years, when we've focused on mental health, when we're talking about foster children, there is often mental health stuff, the fundamental question being posed for mental health in the last 100 years has been, what is wrong with you? And what Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey are saying is that fundamental question needs to be changed into what happened to you. Hence the title of the book is What Happened to You. Because usually that stuff is the result of trauma. And if you heal that trauma, then you're able to reach that person's potential. So that would be my advice to foster parents. Read those books.
A few parents have been asking about how to help children deal when there is an absent parent. Do you have any suggestions for single parents?
Right, yep. For single parents, when there is an absent parent, there's the obvious one of, fill their life up with other role models. If dad's not available, there is often a granddad who's willing to jump in. Sometimes there's extended family members that is like a great uncle that would normally be a little bit distant. But when you actually outline the situation, you want male role models for your kid, and he was your favourite uncle, and he's actually quite happy to come and pick the kid up once a week and take him for a ride in his truck or whatever. So don't be afraid to ask. As far as the absent parent goes, there's really nothing I think that you can do for the absent parent other than hassling them and telling them what a bad parent they are and how they're constantly letting them down. Obviously doesn't help. They just become more and more distant. So yeah, honestly, the best strategy for getting a distant father involved is, you're not going to like this answer, is to stop nagging him and telling him what a shit father he is usually the best way to get them more involved. With an absent dad, there's an absent dad, and 99% of the time there's conflict in the relationship. And where that mother used to frame him very positively when they were partners, she now frames him in the most negative aspect. So, yeah, avoid the conflict. Avoid thinking that you can turn him into a great parent, and really just try and make it as receptive as possible for him to be involved. I know that feels like you're giving in and you're catering to him, but the question was, how do we make it easier for that child? And sometimes it does mean that other parent has the emotional maturity of a 14-year-old, and he's never going to step up to the bar and actually be a parent. So we can stand back and judge him for it, or we can acknowledge that he's bloody 14 years old emotionally and he needs a bit of help. And so again, you do 90% of it. You set up, even though you shouldn't have to, but you're not focusing on what you should and shouldn't have to do. You're focusing on the best thing for your child. And the best thing for your child is to actually see their father. It can only happen once a year. If you've got to arrange it and do 90% of the work and pay for the McDonald's meal, at least the kid is seeing his dad once a year. But yeah, there is no way to actually make that dad step up. I think they've got this decision they have to make for themselves.
Nicole asks, what is your advice on dealing with peer pressure, ways to discuss it with our son and equipping him with the tools he needs to be able to say no when he needs to?
Right, yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Our old chief science advisor to the Prime Minister, Sir Peter Gluckman, he was involved in some research around this, around what actually, how do you communicate with teenagers, because they've got different brains than adults, and what's the most effective. So, according to the literature, the number one most effective thing is a thing called rehearsal. It just means practicing a situation with your child. So, when the kid's going to come up and say, oh, you're fat and, got glasses and you're a nerd, then you say to the child, okay, well, what are some responses that you can use to get yourself out of that? You don't want to say anything that's going to inflame it, but you want to sort of be able to keep your own mana. So you rehearse it, you practice it at home. Okay, what's going to happen next time? Okay, you be the bully, I'll be the, and let's practice at rehearsal. They made an ad, they used that research to say what actually is an effective way of talking to a teenager, and they used the results to make a television commercial. And it was that commercial going, oh, I can't eat your ghost chips. That one, and he was in at the start and he's going, what are you doing, bro? Oh, I'm internalising a really complicated situation. That internalising a really complicated situation, he was rehearsing how he was going to say to his mate, look, I don't think you should have the keys because you've been drinking too much. But rehearsing it beforehand was the successful strategy. Remind me of the question again.
Advice on dealing with peer pressure, ways to discuss it with our son, and to equip him with the tools he needs.
Yeah, so it's that, and also trying to get the child to have a conscious idea of who they want to be as a person. Well, who do you want to be? What are your ideals? You don't have them set in stone now. You're a young person discovering who you are, but there probably are some things that you don't want to compromise. So have conversations with your child about what are the things that he does not want to compromise on. And then the rehearsal of, well, when you are asked to compromise on those things, how are you going to respond? I think about this come up. I recently had a parenting talk around drinking with teenagers. And, one child is really into sports and really wants to achieve high in the sports, but the other kids are going, oh, come on, have a drink, everyone else is doing it. Yeah. And so, with that child, it was about knowing that actually one of my central things is I want to achieve in sports. So I need to be strong in that. But then they also knew that they'll have moments of vulnerability. So they had things up their sleeve to be able to say, like blaming the coach. So if they didn't feel particularly strong that day, but saying, no, these are my beliefs, so that's what I'm sticking to, they just go, oh no, the coach would kill me if he finds out that I drink before tomorrow's game. And, but it's just having the planned responses is the way to deal with peer pressure. It's a difficult thing to deal with, and it really impacts on the kids' learning and self-esteem. So it's a huge issue.
Jenna asks, how can you avoid a toddler becoming anxious later in life?
How can you avoid a toddler becoming anxious later in life? Make them feel supported and don't push them into doing things that they're not ready for. So if you think, oh, he's a bit cautious and he's a bit clingy, oh no, just go to your aunties, and then you run away to the car and leave them there screaming, that's not going to make an anxious child less anxious, that's going to make an anxious child more anxious. So instead, follow their lead. If he's petrified of staying with his auntie at 4, even though all of your other kids are able to do it at 4, then just accept the fact that he's not like all of your other kids, and maybe that's something he can't do until he's 6. If you force him to do it before he's ready, he will produce an anxious child. So it's really about, it might seem counterintuitive, but it's about if the child's anxious, then reassure them that they are safe. The anxious child being allowed to sleep in your bedroom is probably less anxious than the child being told, don't be silly, go down your other end. I think I use the metaphor sometimes with parents that if I wanted to encourage you to be a skydiver, then I wouldn't be taking you up on a plane and saying, don't be ridiculous, and pushing you out of the plane before you were ready. You would never skydive again in your life. I'd have to encourage you and let you be in charge of it. But if you get up there and that day, no, you can't do it today, we're not doing it today, and we land the plane again, I have to follow that and wait until the day that you're actually ready to decide for yourself to leap out of the plane. That might take 7 trips up in the plane, which is frustrating because I just wanted you to do it the first time. But if you've ever got any hope of this person developing a love of skydiving, you're going to have to do it the 7 times way, not the push them out the plane way. So remember that with your child. Anything you push them into too quickly, you're just going to create anxiety. What the literature would say from a purely research point of view, the less anxious a child would be to stay at home with them for as long as possible in the first 7 years of life and avoid childcare centres, especially under the age of 3. And then when they do go to a childcare centre, put them into a free play, child-led curriculum under the age of 7. That's, statistically and research-wise what's going to produce the less anxious child. The more free play they experience under the age of 7, the less statistical chance there is they will have anxiety and depression as a teenager. So that anxiousness, from a research point of view, is prevented by free play under 7.
Many parents are asking about separation anxiety from newborns through to primary school age.
Okay.
Do you have any advice in dealing with this across different age groups?
Yeah, so separation anxiety for some parts, when the child's young, separation anxiety, anywhere from sort of 6 months, but to that 6 to 12 month period, I say 9 to 11 months, but children develop differently. Separation anxiety is normal then, it's part of your cognitive development. Basically, the short version of what's happening is the baby, when they're under 6 months old, doesn't even know you can be separated because they think you are the same person. They were growing inside your womb for all that time. They've been born, but they don't know they're separate. That's why they are quite happy for you to hand them around the room generally, and they don't have separation anxiety because they literally don't understand you can leave. And then they get to a stage of cognitive development where they basically go, oh look, you've got your own arms and I've got my arms. Oh, you've got your own legs and I've got my legs. Oh my goodness, you've got your own whole body. And followed by, we're separate entities, which is followed by, oh my God, that means you could leave, which is followed by super clinginess because now I know you can leave. So that's separation anxiety. It's just I've only just learned that you actually could separate. A baby under 6 months old doesn't have separation anxiety, just like you don't lie awake at night worrying that your right arm is going to leave you. You'll just take it for granted that your right arm's attached and can't leave you. That's how your baby thinks about you under 6 months old. So that separation anxiety is normal. What they need is object permanence. You'll know when the kid gets to this age because that's the age where you can't go to the toilet without leaving the toilet door open so the child can see you, because even just shutting the toilet door on the other side causes them to have major panic attacks, because what they lack is what we call object permanence, which just means that even though you can't see the object, it still permanently exists. So the way that you teach a child of that age object permanence is the way we've been doing it for 1,000 years, peekaboo. Look, you can't see me, but boo, I'm still actually here. Look, you can't actually see me, I've disappeared, but boo, I'm still actually here. Object permanence. You can't see me, but I still actually exist. You just have to do that 20,000 times, and your child has object permanence, and then you can shut the toilet door, and there's less separation anxiety. As they get older, just like I said before, already, separation anxiety, it's counterintuitive, but your child will deal with separation anxiety more if you cater to them and do it within their comfort zone than if you go, oh, don't be ridiculous, and push them too far. That will just bring on way more anxiety. So follow the child's lead. Do it how grandparents do it. Watch how grandparents do it. They don't push the kid out of the plane for the skydiving thing. Grandparents are much more patient, much more follow the child's lead. I mean, not all the time. Some grandparents are horrible, but just in general. When you think about how does a parent do it and how does a grandparent do it, grandparents are a lot softer and a lot more patient. That's generally what we should be aspiring to.
So this will be the final question.
Okay.
Marion asks, we have a 14-year-old boy who's not particularly academic and has never liked school much. He's already talking about leaving school.
Mm-hmm.
All he wants to do is have fun, and learning doesn't fit that label. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I would validate for him that school often is a horrible experience for a lot of kids, and they're better off not being there. And I think if we don't acknowledge, if he's not academic and that environment's not for him, if we don't acknowledge that, he's just going to feel isolated and alone. But I would say, but you do, school is only capturing those people. You might be a musical genius, you might be an interpersonal genius, interpersonal skills genius. There's lots of ways you can be a genius that school does not pick up on. But yeah, it's a difficult one, because you're going to have a conversation with the kid that validates how he's feeling and say, so it would support you to find an alternative path, but staying at home and playing PlayStation and just having fun is not an alternative path. That's why at 14 you're not allowed to leave school, because you lack the emotional maturity to make those decisions when you say things like, I just want to have fun. Because even at 14, you kind of know that one day you're going to want to support a family, and you're not going to want to be on the unemployment benefit, and you're going to want a future. So I'd acknowledge his feelings, but say you need to come up with a better alternative plan and a better alternative pathway. Here's some people that can help you, career guidance people. There's lots of people that can help. come up with an alternative pathway because school's not meeting your needs, but sitting and playing PlayStation is not the alternative pathway that I'll be supporting. Sweet. Hey, thanks everybody. Thanks for signing in, and yeah, we'll look to do. We're doing another Facebook Live. We've got another one of these to do with the NIB. So yeah, thanks for your participation, everybody, and kia ora koutou.